Alright, so check this out. I was on my laptop, scrolling through sites because I had nothing better to do. It was around 1 in the morning, and I ended up on a game site, and I was there for a decent while. During one of my games, an ad popped up and automatically took me to a different site. From the start, this site was super sketchy. The background was black, and the text on site was a faded red. It was a chat room. As much as I was weirded out, I was also very curious. I stayed for a minute to see what people were talking about. In the chat log, it showed the username guest463379 had recently logged in. I'm guessing that was me. My computer started to act up, and someone got into the chat room and started typing. I tried to get my computer to stop being weird, and a message was finally put into the chat. Dalton J. Overmeyer, my full name. The typing bubble popped up again, but before he could send the message, I shut my laptop down. I thought that was it for the night, so I tried to forget about it and went to bed. The next day, I didn't even remember what happened. I got up at about 10 and went to get breakfast, and I saw that my mom had already left for work. I got some Reese's Puffs and went to the couch where I turned on the TV and checked my phone. What came on the TV was the news, so I turned it a few times until I found something that I could tolerate. As I ate my cereal, I just responded to a few text messages sent to me by my friends. I then checked my Snapchat, Twitter, and then Instagram. I had a few new followers, but one kind of stood out to me even more than the rest. The username looked familiar somehow, but hey, I brushed it off. I clicked on their profile and he had no posts, and his profile picture was just the standard blank Instagram photo. He had around 400 followers and was following close to maybe 300 people. I thought it was odd, but I ignored it and continued on with my day until about 2 p.m. I went outside to check the mail since our mail usually comes around 2, and as soon as I stepped out the front door, there was a letter sitting on the top of our porch. I picked up the letter and it read Dalton J. Overmeyer, my full name again. Confused, I opened the letter cautiously and saw that there was a single folded up piece of paper inside the envelope. I pulled it out, and the letter had all of my information on it, including my address. It had to have been hand-delivered. There was one message on the letter, and it wasn't typed, like the rest of it was. The message simply read, "I'll see you soon, Dalton." Now that I was officially and fully creeped out, I went straight back inside and I locked the door. I shut all the blinds and locked everything that could be used as an entranceway. The event last night crossed my mind, so I ran upstairs to my laptop, I opened it, and I powered it on. As soon as I got logged in, the laptop was no longer glitching, but the site from last night was still on my computer. The last thing that was said in the chat was, "I'll be seeing you shortly, Dalton." It was the same guy from last night. I thought of the weird Instagram follower and quickly pulled out my phone and checked my notifications. I clicked on the guy's profile and held it up next to the chat room. They had the exact same username. Before I could even process what was happening, a new chat appeared in the box. It was from the guy. He said, "Hi, Dalton. I see you have my letter." I read the text out loud, and my face went from really creeped out to absolutely horrified. I was clutching the letter in my hand, and I looked at my hand in horror and looked back at the screen. A new tab popped up, and it was me. My own camera from my own laptop. I looked at it and pulled up my phone. A new message appeared in the chat. "Put the phone down." I read the message and continued on my phone to call 911. Another new message popped up on the screen. "If you press that call button, you won't live to see them arrive." My heart sank as I read that message. I slowly lowered my phone and set it on the desk. Another new tab popped up on the screen. It was me, but from a different angle. This time, it was a live camera feed coming from the corner of my room. My eyes quickly darted around the room to find the source. There was a small micro camera installed into the top corner next to the ceiling on my wall. As I got closer to inspect the said camera, I heard a notification come from my laptop. I walked back over to see what it was. A new message that said, "I see you found one of my cameras. Congratulations, Dalton." After I read that, a picture message was sent into the chat. It was a picture of me again, but this time, it was from my closet. Horrified, I slowly turned to the closet and began to walk towards it. As I got closer, my heartbeat increased tenfold. When I finally reached the closet door, I swung it open and found nobody there. "What the hell?" I said out loud. I swiped my clothes out of the way until I reached the back of the closet. I dropped to my knees and began to search for a camera. Instead of finding a camera, I found an extremely small hole in the wall. Stupidly, I decided to put my eye up to it, and from there, I could see the bathroom on the other side. I dashed out of my closet, grabbed a bat that was in there, and ran to inspect the bathroom for people. Luckily, there was nobody. But since I'm on the second floor, there was a window in the bathroom. I peered out of it to find a drone hovering outside the window. I jumped back in horror and threw open the blinds. The drone flew out of view, and I thought to myself on the way back to my room, if he's able to fly a drone that precisely, he must be close. That thought ran shivers up my spine. When I got back to my room, there was another new chat. "That bat is going to do you no good." I tried not to let my fear take over and start crying, so I gripped the bat as hard as I could. I took a deep breath and I asked him, "What do you want?" Within about a minute, I got a response. "Oh, Dalton, why do you think all this happened? It wasn't a coincidence at all. I know who you are. I've known about you for a long time. Did you really think that ad popped up out of nowhere? No. I put that on that website because I knew you'd go there. I just had to wait for you to get on your laptop." Another picture message was sent, but this time it was from my window across the room. I dashed to the window, but I saw no drone. So how did he take a picture of me? I heard a notification from my laptop. I went back over to see a message. "Confused much? Look again." I walked back over and saw nothing, besides the neighbor's yard and the street. At first I saw nothing, but as I narrowed my vision on a car that I've never seen before on our street, I ran back to the laptop. A new message popped up on the screen. "That's not where I am." I went back over one more time and looked around the car, to a tree, on a blank space of land that has no house on it. The laptop gave a notification, but I didn't leave. I took out my phone from my pocket and I used the camera app to look out that far. I zoomed in all the way and I saw him, standing by that tree. He was wearing some type of mask and hood, all in black clothes. I ran back to the laptop and checked the message. "Bingo! Why are you doing this?" I shouted out of fear, and I never got a response. I stayed in the bathroom with my phone and my bat until my mom got home. I quietly opened the door and looked downstairs to see her opening the door. She shut the door, and I ran up to her and tried to tell her what had happened, but the words just wouldn't come out. She told me to calm down and use my words, so I took a deep breath, and I tried to tell her. As soon as the first few words came out, I heard 3 loud bangs on the door. I told my mom to get back and I held up my bat. "What in God's name are you doing?" she shouted. I didn't listen to her and I swung open the door, ready to swing at whoever was there. "Whoa, chill," a voice yells out before I could even see who it was. I look over my bat and I see my friend, Chase. "Jesus Christ, Chase, you gave me a heart attack," I said in a slightly angry but also relieved voice. "I'm sorry. I saw your mom was home and I just figured you were too." I invited him in and sat him and my mom on the couch. I explained the whole situation and I even tried to show them the laptop. The chat was, of course, deleted now, but I remembered there were still cameras. I ran upstairs and they followed me. I showed them, and their expressions went from slightly worried to horrified. The car was gone outside, so we all hopped in and sped to the police station. By now, it was closing in on 8 o'clock. We made the police report, and I even showed them a picture of the camera on my phone and the hole in my closet. They were very skeptical at first, but after I showed them the camera and the hole, I could tell they were starting to believe me. We waited in the lobby, and they came back to us after about a half hour. It was almost 9 p.m. now, and they showed us that this type of camera can only be custom made because of how small it is and how far its range is. There are many companies that could make this type of camera. So they ran by all the recent purchases, and there was nothing. A horrid idea came into mind. What if the guy bought it before me, and he used it on others? I blurted out. The officer looked at me strangely, and then said, "That's not a bad idea, kid." He went into the back for about another 15 minutes, and then came out again, this time with a few papers. He sat down and showed me them. The paper was a list of people that have gone missing combined with purchases from tech shops. One of them lined up. A custom micro camera paid for with cash. It's $165. Jenny Wilmsley, 15, missing in 2018. The camera was bought in February of 2018. Jenny went missing in July of 2018. Did you also say he had a drone with a custom zoom and camera and another camera that he used himself? The officer said. Yes. He also hacked into my laptop somehow, I blurted out right after. We can't trace the hacker, but we can trace the purchases. I'll see if I can get him right now, the officer said while getting up. He began to make a call and headed to the back. A few officers came back out and said they would be escorting us back to our house. We drove back with them behind us and let them inside the house. It was now an official crime scene. That night, all three of us stayed in a hotel and waited for further updates from the police. At about 3 a.m, I awoke to tapping on the window. So, groggily, I walked over to the window in my boxers and a t-shirt, and I opened the blinds. I saw him. The man in the mask was at my window. The man in the mask hadn't moved since I peeked through the blinds. I silently opened the patio door and I stepped outside. The man still hadn't moved. I approached him and I poked his shoulder. He wobbled. I took off the mask only to find myself staring at a blank, white mannequin face. He had tricked me. But then I thought of something. This isn't a trick. This was a distraction. He knew where we were somehow. I ran back inside and woke up my mom and my friend Chase. We all knew just by looks that we needed to call the police. I used my cell phone to call the cops, and they arrived very shortly. They investigated, and they told us there are armed police officers outside your house. We cleaned up the crime scene. You should be safe. So we gathered our stuff and got into the car to head home. When we finally got back, we got all of our stuff from the back seat and went inside to finally get some rest. I woke up at 5 a.m. to a call on my phone. It was a local number. I picked up, and immediately I was met with the voice of the chief investigator I talked to earlier. He sounded worried. We found an unidentified car parked near the hotel. We traced the number of the license back, and it was a stolen plate from a case 3 years ago. I felt sick from hearing that, but my next thought killed me entirely. If he's not in the car, where is he? I said. I could hear the investigator's heart drop. He yelled at his fellow officers to immediately get to my address. The phone hung up before I could even process what was going on until it hit me. He was in the car with us. Before I could even make it to the stairs, the front door opened and I heard footsteps. I quickly ran back to my room and I hid in my closet in hopes that whoever was down there wouldn't find me. I heard footsteps come up the stairs and into my hallway and then outside my door.
Dalton,
I heard. It wasn't from outside the closet. It came from right behind me. Before I could look, I felt a hand with a thick, black glove cover my mouth as the door opened. The radio chatter came on as he entered. Dalton is gone. requesting backup immediately. It was an officer. I felt a small but sharp pain in my neck as the officer ran back down the stairs. My vision started to blur. It was an anesthetic. Later, I woke up in a strange room that was filled with technology. I could see wires, cameras, and the works. There was a door across the room. I tried to get up, but I was bound to the chair. The man wearing the mask entered within a few minutes and started to set up a tripod. After he set that up, he hooked up a microphone to the camera and he started recording. Based on the room, I'm guessing we were underground. I looked behind me and I saw another door, but this one was wooden. I looked back at the man in horror and I asked him, "What are you doing?" He chuckled and he moved the camera off to the side of me. He then proceeded to pull down a screen that was connected to the ceiling, and then he walked behind me. I heard the wooden door creak open and slowly close behind him. I turned around to see what was happening. He had brought out a projector on a rolling cart, along with a few films. He began setting it up just in front of the wooden door that he came out of. I looked away once the bright projector light switched on, and then I looked back to the screen to see some horrific things. This guy was making snuff films. I could only assume that I was next. It made sense. He watched his victims for weeks, filming them, knowing them. He would then use his knowledge and technology to break these victims down until he took them. I had to figure out a way to make it out of wherever this is immediately. The chair was bound to the floor. It was metal, and he had officer-grade handcuffs on each armrest. The footage continued playing while he was off somewhere getting whatever he was getting, and I began to panic. I yanked the handcuffs hard and repeatedly. One of the handcuffs had a slightly sharp edge, and I used it to cut my wrist open, not on the vein, but just enough to bleed. As my wrist began to be covered in blood, I heard his footsteps upstairs. I had to move faster and hold in my screams of pain. I used the blood and squeezed my hand through the handcuffs to finally get one hand free. Now I was stuck. How do I get my other hand out in this short amount of time? I could only think of one way. First, I tried to find an edge, but one of these pairs of handcuffs seemed to be newer than the other. The next option was going to be painful, but if I was going to survive, it needed to be done. I broke my wrist and multiple bones in my hand while biting down on my shirt to silence the cries of agony. I eventually got it out, but how would I get out of the cellar? As I heard him start to come down the stairs of the cellar, I thought of an idea. I found something I could throw to get his attention to go somewhere else. I then hid behind the door that would open. As soon as he opened the door, he dropped what he was carrying in shock and he screamed. It was more like a yell of pure anger and rage more than a scream of fear. He saw the chair was empty. I then threw the small object to the corner of the room that he hadn't looked towards yet. It caught his attention enough, and he drew a large knife from a sheath and walked quickly over to that corner of the room. I decided to make my move. I snuck up the stairs and found myself in a broken down and abandoned house. I made my way quickly to a broken door and I walked out. I was in the middle of nowhere. The road was paved, but not recently. There was a cornfield about a mile down the road. When I heard a noise from inside, my last bit of adrenaline kicked in and I took off down the road. I ran until I could see civilization. It was my neighborhood. I found myself in that field that he was standing in watching me the other day. I ran and I jumped the fence that separated the road from the field. I ran to my house and I burst inside. Immediately, I collapsed on the floor. My mother came running in with multiple police officers. They called for backup and for EMS. I told them exactly where he was and I told them exactly what happened. I was rushed to the hospital and it took a few days to recover. Chase was allowed to go home while I was kidnapped, although he had officers with him as well. I got word from the chief investigator that they never found this guy. I gave them all the information I had, but it still wasn't enough. All remained normal after that. I fully recovered and was going to therapy. I would say it was about a month and a half before something related to the incident happened again. I was watching TV on the couch, home alone, and I flipped past the news channel, but something caught my eye. I quickly flipped back, and I immediately saw on the national news. Breaking news. Man who is now being called the DWS killer strikes local town, down paralyzed with fear. I turned up the volume and I listened to the girl speak. The dark web stalker, also known as DWS, kills in a local town of West Virginia. Police say related cases in the state are now blamed on the DWS. This totals a body count of 22. I muted the TV because I recognized it. It was the same man that hunted me, but I survived. Seconds later, someone banged on my door. I was hesitant to open, but I ended up doing so anyway. It was the police. Dalton Overmeyer, you are being placed into high-security witness protection by the FBI. You will remain safe. I looked outside the porch to see an undercover FBI van. They told me to gather everything I need as fast and neatly as possible that I will need for the coming months until he's captured. It took 15 minutes to gather my things while armed guards waited outside my house and inside as well. They escorted me outside and into the van. As I got inside, I immediately noticed the van was armored from the inside. In the back, the team of armed guards sat down with tactical rifles. There were 3 seats in the front, kind of like a truck. There sat a driver in body armor and the chief investigator of our town. He began explaining the situation and where I will be taken to. It was about 30 minutes and we started driving through a national park. Something didn't feel right. I looked at all the people in the van and they had the same expression I did. They knew something wasn't right. The day started turning into night as the trees got thicker. I saw a very shady area around a mile up. As we got closer, my heart started thumping in my chest. As the area got closer, it began to be unbearable. "Stop!" I screamed as the driver looked at me along with everyone else. The back end of the van exploded and sent the front half of the van flying into a tree that was just ahead. I blacked out for God knows how long. When I began to open my eyes, I noticed I could see the forest and the rest of the van that exploded. My vision was blurred, and I began to see someone emerge from the tree line. I blinked, and he was that much closer. I squinted to see who it was, but I regretted doing it immediately. Guess who? It was the man in the mask. When I woke up again, I was in the trunk of a car. It took a minute for me to come to my senses. I most likely had a severe concussion, but what really brought me to my senses was how hot and stuffy it was. I felt a slightly cool breeze on my hand, and I jolted my head back to see what it was. I saw the slightest sliver of daylight. He punctured a hole in the trunk to give me just enough air to survive and keep me conscious. I wiggled and squirmed my way into a position where my mouth and my nose were directly next to the hole. My head was pounding, so I decided to close my eyes since I was completely tied up anyway. I woke back up when I felt the car stop because my nose slammed hard into the back of the truck. I then saw a giant flash of light and squinted until I could see again. The man in the mask was staring right at me with the sun beaming behind him. I felt something wet drip down my now throbbing nose. It dribbled onto my lip. I could taste it was blood, and lots of it.
Oh, did I stop too hard?
I heard in a deep, low voice, followed by a chuckle. He picked me up and threw me over his shoulder as we entered a hospital. The hospital wasn't active, though it was an abandoned, run-down hospital. He slammed my body onto a wheelchair and strapped me up even more. He chuckled to himself after he was done, and then began wheeling me down the hallway. This wasn't a newer kind of wheelchair. It was one of those old wooden ones that are very uncomfortable. He wheeled me into a room with a large mirror and some run-down machine in it. I could hear a TV coming from the other room, but the audio quality wasn't great, so I assumed it was an older kind of big box TV, you know? I heard his footsteps become quieter as he walked away, and I stared at myself in the mirror, trying to focus away from the pain. He didn't come back for a while after that, and I didn't think there was a way out other than to somehow break the wheelchair. But to break it, I would at least need a little bit of room to move. He had strapped me down to the point where I physically couldn't budge anywhere. All I could do was look around. But then I realized every wheelchair has brakes. He had to have locked the brakes, but it's common sense to know how to break them. Force. After about 10 minutes of trying to wiggle, I finally got enough room to slightly move my back. I took that opportunity to use my lower back to slam it as hard as I could. I kept trying for about another 10 minutes. There wasn't much room, but I had to do what I could. I eventually heard the slightest crack. I turned my head to the side of the wheelchair where it came from. I looked at the ground to find a little chip of metal come off the brake. That gave me enough motivation to keep going. I kept doing that until I heard another crack. Another piece of the brake came off. As I kept moving, the straps were loosening. Slowly, but surely. I kept repeating that until I heard a slightly bigger crack. I looked to see if the brake actually came off. It took 25 minutes of that for it to finally work. My back was throbbing, but I would rather have a cracked tailbone than to be dead. I hit it one more time to make the wheelchair move. It spun me around and the wheelchair then tipped over. I slammed to the ground, but heard a loud crack as well. I tried to see if I could move, but I still couldn't. I heard frantic footsteps coming down the echoey hallway until I heard them right behind me.
Not working out so well, is it?
I heard the familiar deep voice behind me. My vision fixed from sideways to upright as he picked me back up and made sure I was still. He'd left again, and I listened to his footsteps down the hallway until I couldn't hear them anymore. I heard a creaky metal door open and a scream come from inside. The voice sounded familiar. It was the chief inspector's voice. I slammed my back against the wheelchair and I went rolling backwards. The other brake was broken from the fall. I rolled out of the doorway and across the hall into a broken-down shower room. It was disgusting. There were things I could use to my advantage that I caught on to very quickly. One of the broken shower walls had a piece of bent rebar sticking out. I had to roll myself over there. It took about 10 minutes of slamming my back and maneuvering the wheelchair. I quickly stopped when I heard a bang. It came from the room the other two were in. I was so close to the rebar. On the rebar, there was a piece of wall hanging on the tip. If I could get it off, I could use the rebar to cut the straps. I heard the door all the way down the hallway open. I slammed into the rebar and the wall came off. The rebar was a little bit sharp, and I looked at it as I started to roll away. The footsteps were getting closer, so I slammed into the back of the wheelchair, and the wheelchair shot back into the rebar. I felt a stinging pain in the side of my lower back. I tried to look down, and I felt wetness inside my shirt. The rebar had stabbed me. It missed the strap and went straight through the wheelchair and into me. It wasn't deep enough to puncture any organs, but I could eventually bleed out. The footsteps came into the room that I was in. The man in the mask ran across the shower straight to me. He saw the blood dripping, and he pulled out a knife from his belt. He cut the straps and threw me on the ground. I could feel him on my back and touching near the wound. A burning pain made me scream out in agony. I tried to turn around to see, and I could see that the blood had kind of stopped flowing out of me. The man had put something back in his pocket, and then he stood up. My wound was black now. He had cauterized my wound, and I couldn't figure out why. He picked me up and threw me back in the wheelchair that was taken off the rebar. He ended up wheeling me outside the showers, and instead of going to the room I was in previously, he started wheeling me down the hallway. We went past the room with the old TV. Undercover van blown up by IED kills 11. Chief Inspector of Sparrows Ridge is currently missing in action. That's the last I could hear before we entered the room with the metal door. The room was in very poor condition, and it also looked like it was an old crematorium. In the corner sat the chief investigator with a gunshot wound in his head. The man in the mask wheeled me into the opposite corner, and he started asking occasional questions. They weren't questions related to information at all, though. They were just really personal and uncomfortable. He began asking about all the bad things that happened in my childhood, and he made me say them out loud. As I was answering one more question, I heard a loud bang. It shook the entire room and my ears rang. My jaw started to pound with pain. I looked down to see where the pain was coming from, and I fell unconscious to the ground. How I survived? I have no idea. I heard a few days later the man in the mask was killed in a shootout and the police rescued me. Another story says that he dropped me off at the hospital and then left the country. I'm not sure what the true story is or was. The only thing I remember after that is waking up in the hospital. Apparently, I was in a coma, but my jaw was completely shattered. The bullet was shot at an angle, so it didn't pierce anything fatal, but left my jaw permanently disfigured. "Wow, what a powerful story," said the interviewer. "What did you do when you woke up from the coma?" "Well," I started, "I tried to just recover as best as I could. I tried intense therapy. I got a job from home so I don't have to leave my house. Sometimes I wished that bullet did kill me, but that's never a good ending to a story. Something had a plan for me. Something made me survive, and since I'm here, I might as well finish it out strong." "Outstanding. What an inspiration," said the interviewer. "Cut!" A loud voice echoed throughout the set. The director walked up to me and began talking to me. I don't remember exactly what she said, but it was something along the lines of that cheesy crap of, "Oh, congrats, you got your first documentary." But at what cost? Getting my jaw blown off by a .44? Being left with a list of mental issues, all for a documentary? Yeah, I'll get paid millions for it, but it won't fix anything. This event happened in 2018. I was thinking these thoughts and replaying all of it in my mind as I walked home. I was in LA at the time, and my apartment wasn't far from the studio they were filming the documentary at. I'm sorry if this is a boring ending, but that's my story. My name is Dalton, and I survived the DWS. Thank you. Finishing my work for the day, I shut off my webcam and I went up to the kitchen to make some Kool-Aid and wait for my dinner to arrive. I heard a few knocks at my door and I got so excited. I ordered my favorite pizza and I was so hungry. I looked through the peephole of the door and I didn't see anybody. I just assumed they left the pizza on the ground. I unlocked the door and I opened it. There wasn't a pizza at the door though. There was only a man, his eyes locked in on mine.
Guess who?
It was the man in the mask. Hey, wanted to say thank you for making it through this entire series with me. I thank you for it. The writer, he goes by Dead, he thanks you for it as well. And a special shout out to another narrator called Ghoul Angel. He played the voice of the man in the mask in this series. I think he did such a great job. And before you ask, yes, that's his real voice. I'll leave a link to his channel so you can learn more about him. I really think he is something special. If you've got a friend that enjoys scary stories about the dark web, stalkers, or cop dramas, I guess, send them this series. They'll probably like it, and then you'll get to be the cool friend that knows where all the scary stories are. I'm gonna let you go so I can start working on the next series, but before I do, there's one more thing that I wanted to say. You can be whoever you want to be.